Hello everyone, this is Ben, and today we're looking at a Task 1 academic IELTS writing essay from a student of mine. And it's a line graph, as you can see. And it's got very clear trends. It's focusing on the quantity of carbon dioxide emissions per person, so the emissions that each person was responsible for in their activities on average over a 40-year period for 4 countries. Luckily, there are very clear trends. It makes it easy. These two very similar. Overall upward trend, these two overall downward trend. But the one for Sweden isn't really a steady downward trend. It initially goes up over the first decade, the first 10-year period, and then declines thereafter. At first very sharply, and then more gradually. It's being measured in metric tons, which is a kind of mass, like grams. But you can just talk about the quantity in general. Quantity is a word we use when we're assessing the amount of something in terms of some kind of unit like tons or centimeters or something like that. Okay, so let's look at the response. The line chart illustrates information about how many carbon dioxide emissions were emitted by person living in 4 different countries from 1967 to 2007. A bit mixed, some decent things. Of course, it is a line chart, that's recognized. It does focus on CO2 emissions. And it does talk about 4 different countries over that time period. So emissions, of course, is a kind of countable noun, but we don't really say how many. We don't say like 3 emissions. I made 4 emissions today. You made 10 emissions today. That would sound a little bit silly. So I think we should change this. How much carbon dioxide, like CO2 gases being uncountable nouns, was emitted. Just to note, if you use the verb and the noun in the same form, like emitting emissions, it sounds really weird in English. We'd say something like emissions were released or something like that. Generated, produced, something different. By person, well, per person really, but we've already got per person in the task. Excuse me, so I'll change it. It's kind of per capita emissions we're looking at. Per capita, like per person in the population. Per capita by the residents of 4 countries, by people living in 4 different countries from 1967 to 2007. The word different doesn't really have any value, does it? Beyond trying to add an extra word to get closer to 150 words. If there are 4 countries, 2 of them, they're not going to be the same country. So 4 countries is 4 different countries. On the whole, it's very conversational, so let's get rid of that. Overall, more formal writing style. Overall, it can be seen that while the figures for the United Kingdom and Sweden show a downward trend, well, I guess they show if you're looking at them now, but maybe use the past because it's talking about past data until 2007. The figures for... That's a little repetitive, isn't it? The figures. I'll just say those, the second time, those figures, basically those for Italy and Portugal experienced an upward trend. And again, it feels a bit repetitive, downward trend, downward trend. I'll say upward, 1. Use that as a pronoun for trend. Okay, so getting to the detail paragraphs, the meat of it. At the beginning of the period, people living in the United Kingdom produced CO2 emissions more than 10 metric tons in 1967. We need to add something here, don't we? Of more than 10 tons, like at a rate of, basically. Yeah, at the individual level, so per person in 1967. And I guess they just produced it through their daily activities, via their activities. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I don't know. If you say people did, it kind of sounds like the CO2 is coming from them. But if you say their activities, it's not only breathing, but also driving a car and things like that. And other things which result in more CO2 being released into the Earth's atmosphere. Which was the highest figure, so that's nice, using a relative pronoun there. It constantly dropped to about 8 metric tons in 2007. Yeah, okay, it's a little bit short. I mean, the thing is, it does drop to 8. Well, is it about 8? It looks more like 9, doesn't it? Let's check I've got that right. Yeah, I guess it's closer to 9, isn't it? I mean, it's slightly below 9, just under 9. So I would change that. So it constantly dropped from, it's really, just under 10 to about 9. Just under 11 to about 9. I'll change it so you can read it. Just blue is for factual things. If you wonder about my pen colors, just under 11 to just under 9. Problem is just with space, really. Squeeze it into the top. Just under 11 metric tons, or approximately 11 to, oops, my apologies. Slightly under 9. Oh, I used under before, shouldn't I? Less than. Metric tons in 2007, so that's more accurate now. But the other thing is, it does continually drop, but it's still always the highest, so maybe I would just add something to the effect in the process, showing off with some different grammar that hasn't been used elsewhere. Let's say, comma, despite remaining the highest. Throughout the period, despite remaining the highest throughout. In Sweden, the figure stood at about 8 metric tons in 1967, after which it decreased to below 6 metric tons in 2007 with a slight rise in 1997. There's a lot of good stuff there. Using after which very nicely, like after that year. The figure stood at, that's quite nice. Don't think that's been used yet, has it, in this essay, stood at. The only problem is for Sweden. We've got this initial rise, and that's not really addressed here, is it? So, started at about 8, is it just above? After which it decreased to below. And that's true. But with a slight rise in 1997, no, you've lost me. 1997 is here. So I guess the writer means 1977, but the rise isn't in 1977, is it? It's between 1967 and 1977. It's over that 10-year period, over that decade. So this is just careless, really, just careless. Good writing, but lack of attention, which is a shame, because if someone writes something wrong, you can't just assume they know the right words, even though they've written the wrong words. You have to give them a lower score. I mean, I can say although it increased over the first 10 years, but it's just confusing, because if I say after which for 1967, it sounds like after 1967. I got to change quite a bit here. Let's say rose sharply for the first decade, so rose sharply for 10 years. And then subsequently, after that, after that 10-year period, decreased to below 6 metric tons. To end at 6 metric tons in 2007. So that's a little bit better now. Well, a lot better, to be honest. Let's move on. The initial figure, not figure of, we say figure 4. It's 4 because it's like representing, like the number or proportion or whatever, representing something. The initial figure for Italy was recorded at, oh, that's nice. It needs the at though, because someone's recording this data, aren't they, for like the government or something. The initial figure for Italy was recorded at around half of that of Sweden in 1967, and the figure became almost doubled in 1997. That's a bit problematic. Okay, to begin with, I'll just mention that around is a little informal. Approximately, roughly is a bit better. If you say about or around, it's a little bit informal. It's more like speaking style. But it's okay if you don't want to keep repeating the same words. But I don't think approximately has been used. I don't think roughly has been used. So use the formal ones as a priority, I guess. Okay, more importantly, so Italy, half that of Sweden in 1967. It's not really and, is it? We're talking about contrast, but it later overtook that of Sweden. So it's not and, it's but, right? I don't want to repeat the figure, but it had, or just but had. I don't need to use any noun there, nominalization. I know we're talking about the figure for Italy. We don't say become almost double. We use double here as a verb. So but had almost doubled. Not in 1999, by 1999. By is often used when we're talking about changes that happen up to a time in the past in things like line graphs. We use by and past perfect. So had doubled using the verb double, but had doubled by 1997. In 1997 sounds like it happens in that year, but it doesn't. It happens over the 30-year period leading up to that year. So by 1997, not with overtaking, just overtaking. I could say with it overtaking, with the figure overtaking. We don't use with followed by the verb like that. But I don't need to say with it overtaking because the subject is still the figure. So I can skip that, just the initial figure, blah, 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 overtaking that for Sweden in 1987. From 1997 onwards just means until the end. You don't write till, you write until. Till is speaking style, is very formal, very informal, sorry. Like how I might say cause instead of because. So from 1997 onwards, the figure remains stable. That's okay. The figure for Portugal was about a fourth. We usually say a quarter of what it was. So that's quite nice. Nice for variety of what it was for Sweden in 1967, and it dramatically rose to about 6 tons in 2007, which is used incorrectly here. It's not clear what which is referring to. Excuse me. So we're talking about the figure for Portugal. Let's say and instead of finally, I'll use ultimately, more formal. Ultimately, instead of becoming the same as, it would be ing here, like we have over here. After the comma, ultimately becoming the same as Sweden. Well, matching the value of that for Sweden. Ultimately matching let's say ultimately matching the corresponding figure for Sweden, the corresponding quantity in Sweden that year. I don't want to just keep repeating the same thing. Saying the figure for can be nice, but it's just really overused. You know, it's relying excessively on it due to limitations with the language of the writer, the language level at the moment. Okay, as for the scores, I just gave it a 6 overall. For the task achievement, first of all, I thought it was quite nice and it did generally cover the requirements of the task. Had a clear overview of the main trends. Talking about, 2 countries having an upward trend, 2 with a downward trend. Parts could have been more fully extended, I think. I didn't give it 7, I gave it 6 because there was that part which was inaccurate very noticeably. With a slight rise in 1997, we said that's just not true. So I feel a bit mean, but yeah, just be more careful. Don't make silly mistakes. Coherence and cohesion, I gave this 6, I think. Generally arranging information and ideas coherently, yes. Clear overall progression, yes. Using cohesive devices effectively, but sometimes mechanically, the figure for this, the figure for that, the figure for this. And referencing wasn't always used correctly, like we talked about the use of the word which and how that wasn't used too correctly. Moving on to lexical resource, an adequate range of vocabulary for the task. Yeah, I mean, if you're repeating the same words too much, like the figure, the figure, the figure, the figure, then it's not really showing an extremely wide range of vocabulary. There was some good stuff, definitely. I pointed out a few good things I liked, like onwards, doubled. What else is good? Constantly dropped. That's quite nice. Something shows a downward trend, upward trend. That's quite nice. But you can see it's a little bit limited with the language. Talking about the trends, that's quite nice. Dramatically rose, remains stable. Students tend to overstudy talking about these changes over time when it's continuous data for things like line graphs. So they tend to do that quite well. And lastly, for the grammar, I think it would be 6 or 7. A mix of simple and complex sentence forms, definitely. A variety of complex structures, possibly frequent error-free sentences, possibly. Just to remind you of some of the things I liked. Making a long sentence with while here, that was nice. After which, that was nice. Which was the highest figure, I told you I liked that at the beginning. But it wasn't always done correctly, like there. So I'll say 6 because there wasn't a wide variety, and I don't know if I could say that error-free sentences were frequent. There was some, but there could definitely be more. So overall, I'm going to give it 6 and 6 in each individual part being assessed. So as always, thank you for watching or listening, and I hope you have gained something from watching this video. And I'm curious always if your predicted scores closely align with mine. And if there's anything that I said that you would disagree with, I would always recommend just leaving a comment under the video. I don't tend to watch the videos because I'm a bit shy. I don't like hearing my own voice. That's why I'm not showing you my face. I'm a little bit shy. But one of my colleagues will pass on any feedback, questions, comments to me. So please feel free to leave a comment under the video.